If you run a bar long enough on the edge of civilized
Not bad
space,
for this
you
place.
learn three important things. First, everyone lies. Second, everyone is armed. And third, the stories people tell about themselves are usually more dangerous than the truth. My name is Krell, and I own the Fractured Comet, which sits on Dock Ring 7 of the Terminus Belt Station. A place so unpleasant that even smugglers complain about the neighborhood. For 200 cycles I've watched criminals, mercenaries, traders, bounty hunters, and the occasional wandering diplomat stumble through my doors. I've seen bar fights that ended in orbital bombardments. I've watched crime syndicates collapse over spilled drinks. I thought I had seen everything. Then the human walked in. The evening had started like any other. My regulars were scattered around the room, a table of Threxian smugglers arguing over cargo routes, 2 Kelnari miners quietly drinking away their radiation bonuses, and Garvik Thresh and his Cranthery crew occupying their usual corner like a cluster of armored war machines pretending to be customers. Thresh ran protection rackets through most of the Terminus belt, which meant technically I paid him to not destroy my bar. It was a working relationship. I was polishing glasses with my lower hands while mixing drinks with the upper ones when the front door hissed open. At first, nobody noticed. That happens sometimes. The Comet gets a lot of traffic. But then the station lights shifted slightly as the airlock cycled, and someone near the entrance muttered a word that rippled across the bar like static through a comm channel. Human. The room didn't go silent. Not completely. But conversations lowered just enough that everyone could listen without appearing to listen. I glanced up from the bar. The human stood in the doorway for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dim lighting. He wasn't impressive by galactic standards. Most species in the belt are bigger, heavier, or equipped with natural weapons that humans lack. No claws. No armored hide. No mandibles. Just a tall biped with dark hair, a worn jacket, and the relaxed posture of someone who clearly wasn't worried about being surrounded by criminals. Humans had only joined galactic society about 50 of their years ago, which meant most of us knew them the same way we knew black holes. Through stories. And the stories about humans were strange. They came from a death world. A planet where almost everything tried to kill them. Predators, venomous creatures, microscopic organisms, even the weather. Apparently humans survived by being adaptable, resourceful, unpredictable. But the stories also said they preferred diplomacy, cooperation, peace, which was probably why seeing one walk into my bar felt like watching a librarian wander into a war zone. The human approached the counter. Up close he looked ordinary, lean build, calm eyes, the kind of expression you see on someone who spends a lot of time observing rather than talking. He pulled out a stool and sat down. Then he looked at me. "What do you serve?" he asked calmly. "That won't kill me?" The translator in my ear rendered his voice perfectly. Smooth, casual, almost friendly. I blinked all 4 eyes. "That depends," I said carefully. "On what?" "On what parts of your biology are likely to dissolve if I give you the wrong drink." The human actually smiled. "Flat teeth. Predator teeth. Ethanol works," he said. "Simple sugars too." "Flexible metabolism?" "More or less." I grabbed a bottle of Tyrellian amber from the shelf and poured a small amount into a reinforced glass. "This probably won't kill you." He sniffed it once, then drank it in one smooth motion. Placed the glass back on the counter. "Another." I poured again. "You lost?" I asked. "No." He took a slower sip this time, looking around the room the way a hunter studies unfamiliar territory. "This is exactly where I meant to be." That sentence should have worried me. Nobody comes to the Fractured Comet on purpose unless they're looking for trouble. Or bringing it with them. Across the room, Garvik Thresh noticed the human. And that's when I knew the night was about to become a story people would be telling for years. For a full minute after Thresh noticed the human, nobody moved like they meant it. They moved like they were pretending to be furniture. That's a survival trick in the Terminus belt. If violence is about to happen, the smartest thing you can do is become background. Don't make eye contact. Don't look interested. Don't give anyone a reason to remember you were there. I'd seen it 100 times. A predator spots prey. The room quietly rearranges itself so everyone else doesn't get mistaken for prey. The human didn't rearrange. He sat on his stool like he'd paid rent on it. One hand around his glass, elbow resting on the counter, posture loose. Not slumped. Not tense. Just comfortable. It wasn't bravado. Bravado has a smell. It's loud. It's desperate. It's what people put on when they're trying to convince themselves they're not afraid. This was something else. This was the calm of someone who didn't need to convince anyone. I kept polishing the same glass I'd been polishing for 30 seconds, because my hands needed something to do. My eyes didn't leave Thresh's corner. Garvik Thresh was a Cranthery, which meant he looked like an assault vehicle that had learned to talk. dense muscle under segmented plates, thick neck, jaw made for biting through armor seals. His kind weren't subtle, and neither was his reputation. He ran protection rackets, debt collections, and occasional missing persons jobs for whoever paid him the most credits. 5 cycles ago, a trader refused to pay him. 2 days later, the trader's ship was found drifting with the airlocks welded shut from the outside. Thresh was the sort of creature the station security pretended not to notice. But tonight, every creature in the bar noticed him, because Thresh had that look. The look of someone who had seen something rare and decided to break it just to prove he could. The human took another slow sip. His eyes drifted around the room, landing on tables, corners, doorways. He wasn't staring, not directly. He was doing that soft focus scanning predators do when they're mapping a space. He caught me watching. I immediately looked down at the counter like I'd suddenly found it fascinating. Then the human spoke again, casually, like we were having the kind of conversation that didn't end with blood on the floor. "You get many fights in here?" I snorted before I could stop myself. "You're sitting in the fractured comet. If we didn't get fights, we'd go out of business." He rolled the drink around in his glass as if tasting the idea. "Any rules?" I raised one brow ridge. "No energy weapons. No explosives. No poisoning the house supply. Other than that, people do what they're going to do." "That's generous." "That's survival," I corrected. "The rules here aren't about morality. They're about structural integrity. I can replace a chair. I can't replace half the station." The human nodded like that made perfect sense. Then, as if the universe couldn't handle a quiet moment for more than a few seconds, Thresh stood up. The scrape of his chair against the metal floor was loud enough to cut through the music. Every head in the bar angled just slightly in his direction. Not openly. Nobody wanted to be caught watching. But the attention was there like a pressure wave. Thresh and his crew started walking. 5 Cranthery moving in sync, heavy enough that the floor plates vibrated with each step. Their armor clicked softly where segments overlapped. Their belts carried tools that were absolutely not meant for repair work. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. That's another thing predators do. They move slowly when they're sure the prey can't escape. I leaned forward over the counter, keeping my voice low. "Human," I muttered. The human glanced at me, still calm. "Yeah. Thresh is coming this way." I noticed. "You should leave." He looked down at his glass like he was considering it. Then he said, mild as anything, "I just got here." "That's not a reason." "It is if you came somewhere on purpose." I froze. Something about the way he said it, like it wasn't a warning or a challenge, just a fact, put an unpleasant twist in my gut. "What are you doing here?" I asked quietly. The human didn't answer right away. He took another sip instead. Then he looked at me. "I'm waiting for someone." "Who?" "Doesn't matter yet." That was not comforting. Thresh reached the bar and stopped directly behind the human. The difference in their size was absurd. Thresh towered over him like a wall of muscle and plates. The human didn't turn around. Thresh's voice boomed through the room. "Hey," he said, loud enough that everyone heard it whether they wanted to or not. "Tiny pink thing. You lost." Silence hit the bar like a door slamming shut. Even the music seemed to fade into the background, reduced to a dull vibration. The human continued sipping his drink. I closed my eyes for half a second. Not a prayer. We don't do prayers out here. More like a moment of mourning for my floor, my furniture, and whatever unfortunate creature was about to be carried out in pieces. Thresh leaned closer, looming. "I'm talking to you, meat sack." The human finally turned. Slowly. Like he had all the time in the galaxy. He looked up at Thresh's faceplates, studied him for a brief second, and then said evenly, "I heard you." Thresh's plates darkened. A warning sign in Cranthery biology. "Then why didn't you answer?" The human tilted his head slightly. "Didn't hear a question," he said. "Just heard you making noise." A few beings near the back of the bar actually choked on their drinks. I did something worse. I laughed. It burst out of me, sharp and involuntary, because in 200 cycles I had never heard anyone speak to Garvik Thresh like he was an inconvenience. Thresh turned his head just enough that one of his eyes locked on me. My laughter died instantly. He turned back to the human. "You think you're funny?" The human took another sip. "I think," he said, "you're standing too close." I felt the room tighten. Thresh's crew shifted, spreading slightly, creating a loose semicircle. Surrounding. Containing. And Thresh, genius that he was, reached down with one massive hand toward the human's shoulder. If the human had flinched, if he'd begged, if he'd shown even a flicker of fear, Thresh might have enjoyed the game longer. But the human didn't flinch. He just sighed, softly, like a man bothered by bad weather. And that was when I realized something very important. Thresh thought he was starting a bar fight. The human looked like he was about to finish one. Thresh's hand came down like a loading dock clamp. Big, confident, certain. The kind of grab you use when you've spent your whole life being the largest problem in the room. The human moved. Not with the frantic speed of someone trying to survive. With the practiced efficiency of someone trying not to spill a drink. He slipped out of the grab by turning his shoulder just a fraction. Barely a motion, honestly, and Thresh's fingers closed on empty air. Before the Cranthree's brain could catch up to what his hand had failed to do, the human rotated his body and drove a sharp elbow into the inside of Thresh's forearm. Right into a seam between armor plates. Thresh made a sound that shouldn't come from anything that size, half yelp, half roar, and his arm spasmed hard enough that I heard tendons snap against the plating. The human didn't pause to admire his work. His leg hooked behind Thresh's ankle and his other foot planted on the floor like an anchor. Then he twisted. It wasn't strength. It was physics. Nearly 300 kilos of armored arrogance went down. Thresh hit the deck with a crash that rattled bottles behind my bar and sent a ripple through the floor plates. A drink slid across a table and tipped over. Someone cursed in 3 languages. The human straightened, casually, like he'd just shifted in his seat. He checked his glass. Still full. He took a sip. "I told you," he said mildly, looking down at Thresh, "I'd be annoyed if you made me spill it." For half a heartbeat, nobody moved. Not the patrons. Not Thresh's crew. Not even Thresh, who was blinking at the ceiling like he was trying to remember how gravity worked. Then Dax, one of Thresh's lieutenants, younger and stupider than the rest, recovered first. He yanked a plasma cutter from his belt and snapped it up toward the human's chest. That's when my instincts finally caught up and I found my voice. No energy weapons in my bar. I barked louder than I meant to. Dax didn't look at me. He was staring at the human with that wild, offended anger that comes from watching your worldview get kicked in the teeth. "You just made the biggest mistake of your short life," Dax growled. The human's face stayed calm. "That's statistically unlikely," he said. "I've made a lot of mistakes." Dax's finger tightened. The cutter began to whine. The human's hand flicked. Something small and metallic snapped through the air too fast for most eyes to track. A knife. Not a flashy blade. Not a ceremonial weapon. A simple tool, thrown with the indifferent precision of someone tossing keys onto a table. It struck the plasma cutter's exposed power cell. Dead center. The cutter sparked, hissed, and died in Dax's hand like a creature choking on its own breath. Dax stared at it in disbelief. Then he stared at the knife buried in the cell housing. Then he stared at the human. I watched the realization crawl across his face. This wasn't luck. The human glanced at me over his shoulder, like remembering we had rules. "Apologies," he said. "House rules." "You'll clean up," I snapped, because if I didn't act like I had authority in my own establishment I'd lose what little I had left. The human nodded seriously, like that was reasonable. "I will," he said. After what?" He didn't answer. Because the other 3 Cranthri finally decided they had to do something to save face. They rushed him. All at once. Which is what you do when you don't know what you're doing. Pile mass onto a problem and hope it goes away. I've seen hundreds of bar fights. Most are messy, loud, flailing. This wasn't a bar fight. This was a demonstration. The human moved through them like water through cracked stone, finding gaps, slipping between angles, turning every attempted grab into a mistake. One Cranthri swung wide with a heavy fist. The human stepped inside the arc, close enough that the punch had no space to build power, and drove a palm strike into the underside of the Cranthri's jaw seam. Armor didn't help when the weak point was the body inside it. The Cranthri staggered back, choking. Another grab for the human's shoulder. The human let the hand land, just long enough to take the grip, and used it as leverage, pivoting and throwing the Cranthri into his own teammate. 2 bodies collided. Plates cracked. Someone hit a table hard enough that it folded. Dax, furious and embarrassed, charged with the dead plasma cutter like it was still dangerous. The human took a half step to the side and swept Dax's legs with a low kick that looked lazy but landed perfectly. Dax hit the floor. The human dropped a knee onto the nerve cluster at the base of Dax's neck. Just enough pressure. Dax stopped moving. Not dead. Just switched off. A 3rd Cranthri tried to get behind him. The human's elbow snapped backward into the throat seam. A wet sound. A strangled gasp. The Cranthri collapsed, clutching his neck. The last one hesitated. Actually hesitated. I saw his eyes dart to Thresh on the floor, then to the human, then to the exit. The human noticed the hesitation and, absurdly, gave a small nod like he approved. "Smart," he said. The Cranthri snarled anyway and lunged. The human caught his wrist, twisted it, and the Cranthri's arm rotated in a direction arms were not meant to rotate. A scream ripped through the bar. The human released him immediately, and the Cranthery crumpled, clutching his ruined joint. Then it was over. 90 seconds. Maybe less. 5 Cranthery, one of the nastiest crews in the Terminus Belt, were on my floor groaning, bleeding, and reconsidering every decision that had brought them to this moment. The human brushed dust off his jacket. Checked his glass. Miraculously, it still hadn't spilled. He sat back down on the stool like the violence had been an annoying interruption to his evening. The entire bar was dead silent. He looked at me. "Can I get some water too?" he asked politely. "Hydration's important." I poured water with hands I was mildly embarrassed to realize were shaking. I set it down in front of him. Then I leaned in, voice low, because whatever he wasn't just passing through. "What the hell are you?" I asked. He took a sip of water. Then he looked at me with calm, dark eyes. "Just a guy," he said. "Having a drink?" "No," I whispered. "Nobody is just anything who walks in here and does that." He considered my words like they were fair. Then he nodded once. "Fair point," he said. "My name's Jack Sullivan. I'm looking for someone." "Of course you are." "Who?" I asked, even though my instincts were screaming not to. Jack took another slow sip. "Captain Rin Velayer," he said. My blood went cold. All of it. Simultaneously. Which is impressive when you have 4 separate circulatory systems. "You're looking for Velayer," I repeated, because sometimes saying a thing out loud makes it less real. Jack nodded. "I heard he drinks here." I stared at him. Then at the broken tables. Then at Thresh groaning on my floor. Then back at Jack. "Why?" I managed. Jack's smile returned, small, polite, and somehow more dangerous than the fight had been. "He has something," Jack said, "that belongs to people I represent." He set his glass down gently. "I'm here to get it back." For a moment after Jack said the name Rin Velayer, the entire bar seemed to inhale at the same time. Then nobody breathed. Captain Rin Velayer was not the kind of person you looked for. He was the kind of person you prayed never noticed you existed. Velayer didn't just run a crew. He ran a fleet. 30 ships at last count. Maybe more. Salvage vessels, gunboats, interceptors, a few repurposed war corvettes with their serial numbers filed off. His people controlled half the illegal salvage lanes in the Terminus Belt and had contracts with criminals who made Garvik Thresh look like a street pickpocket. Velayer wasn't a bar fighter. Velayer was the reason entire stations paid protection money. And this human, this quiet, polite human who had just folded 5 Cranthery like cheap cargo crates, was sitting at my bar like he'd come here to pick up a package. "You're looking for Velayer?" I repeated slowly. "That's what I said." Jack's tone wasn't arrogant. That was the worst part. Arrogance you can work with. Arrogant people make mistakes. Jack sounded like he was talking about picking up dry cleaning. "Why?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he rotated his water glass slowly across the counter, watching the condensation form rings on the metal surface. "He has something," Jack said finally, "that belongs to the Galactic Heritage Conservancy." I blinked. "You're joking." "No. That's a museum. Research organization," Jack corrected mildly. "You're telling me you walked into the most violent bar in the Terminus Belt to recover stolen museum property?" Jack tilted his head. "When you say it like that, it sounds silly." "It is silly," I snapped. "Velayer steals warship components and rare minerals, not pottery." "Artifacts," Jack said patiently. "Cultural relics from Praxis 7. My stomach dropped again. Praxis 7 was a protected archaeological world. A dead civilization. Which meant anything taken from it was considered galactic heritage. And stealing from heritage sites wasn't just illegal. It was personal. Species got weird about their ancient history. But Velayer doesn't care about that kind of thing, I said carefully. Jack nodded. Correct. So why would he steal them? Because someone offered him a lot of money? I rubbed 2 hands over my face. You came here alone. Yep. To confront a mercenary warlord with a fleet. Jack shrugged. I prefer talking first. I stared at him. You call what happened to Thresh talking? That was more of a misunderstanding. Before I could respond, the front door hissed open again. And suddenly the temperature in the bar dropped 10 degrees. 6 figures stepped inside. Not thugs. Not smugglers. Professionals. Their armor was matte black composite. Their weapons were compact plasma carbines, held low but ready. They moved like a single organism, spreading across the room in a formation that covered every exit, every angle, every blind spot. Military training. Real military training. The patrons in my bar recognized it immediately. People who live on the edge of civilized space develop excellent instincts for survival. Conversations died mid-sentence. Chairs shifted subtly away from the center of the room. The 6 newcomers stopped 10 steps from the bar. Their leader stepped forward. A Zarathian. Tall, skeletal frame, layered chitin plates across the shoulders, and 6 small eyes arranged in 2 vertical rows. Zarathians were known for one thing: professional mercenary work. Expensive, extremely efficient, and almost impossible to intimidate. His voice came through the translator as cold, precise standard. "We are looking for the human called Jack Sullivan." Every eye in the bar turned toward the stool at my counter. Jack raised his hand politely. "That's me." The Zarathian studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "You will come with us." Jack didn't look surprised. "Captain Velayer?" he asked. "Yes." Jack drained the rest of his water and stood up. "Convenient." I grabbed his arm with 2 of my hands before he could walk away. "This is a trap," I hissed. Jack looked down at my grip, then at me. "I know. They're going to kill you." "They'll try." That answer was delivered with the same calm tone he'd used when ordering his drink, which somehow made it worse. "You just took down 5 Cranthari," I whispered urgently. "That's not the same as walking into Velayer's compound surrounded by armed escorts." Jack patted my hand gently. It was an oddly reassuring gesture. "They're going to take me directly to him," Jack said. "That's what I want." "You could run." "Sure. You should." Jack smiled. "But then I'd have to find him myself." He stretched his arms once, loose and relaxed like someone warming up before exercise. Then he looked at the armed escort. "Well," he said pleasantly, "lead the way." The Zarathian gestured toward the door. Jack walked past them like he'd been invited to dinner. Right before he stepped outside, he paused and looked back at me. "Oh," he said casually, "don't clean up those Cranthari yet." I blinked. "What?" Jack nodded toward Thresh and his battered crew. "When I get back," he said, "I'm buying them all a drink." I stared at him. "When you get back?" "Shouldn't take long." Then the airlock door closed behind him, and Jack Sullivan disappeared into the night with 6 armed mercenaries who were almost certainly escorting him to his execution. I stood behind my bar for a long moment, staring at the empty doorway. Around me, the patrons slowly started breathing again. Thresh managed to sit up, groaning. "What," he rasped, "was that thing?" I poured myself a drink. "Something strong." "Human," I said quietly. Thresh spat blood onto the floor. "Humans are supposed to be weak." I looked at the door Jack had walked through. "Maybe," I said slowly, "maybe we've been hearing the wrong stories." And somewhere out there in the dark between stations, Jack Sullivan was walking into the fortress of the most dangerous mercenary in the Terminus Belt. Alone. The first hour after Jack left was the worst. Waiting is dangerous in a place like the Terminus Belt. Waiting gives people time to imagine things, and imagination tends to lean toward unpleasant outcomes. I stood behind my bar cleaning the same glass for the 3rd time while my mind replayed the last 10 minutes over and over again. A human archaeologist had just walked willingly into the headquarters of a mercenary warlord with enough firepower to conquer small colonies. And he'd done it with the casual confidence of someone going out to buy groceries. Across the room, Garvik Thresh and his crew were slowly recovering from their lesson. One of them groaned and tried to sit up. Another was holding his twisted arm like it might fall off if he let go. Thresh himself leaned against a wall, rubbing the side of his head where it had met my floor earlier. Every few minutes he glanced toward the door. Not with anger. With something closer to confusion. "You said he's human," Thresh muttered eventually. "That's what he told me." "That wasn't human fighting." "You volunteered for the demonstration," I reminded him. He grunted. One of his crew, Dax, was staring at the knife still embedded in the ruined plasma cutter. "He hit the power cell," Dax whispered. "I saw that." "From across the room." "Yes." "With a throw." "Yes." Dax swallowed. "That's not normal." Before I could answer, a voice from the back of the bar spoke up. "Humans aren't normal." Everyone turned. The speaker was an old Verlik trader who had been quietly nursing the same drink for most of the evening. Verliks lived a long time and spent most of it traveling between frontier stations collecting rumors and relics. If anyone in the room knew strange stories, it would be him. "What do you mean?" someone asked. The Verlik tapped the rim of his glass thoughtfully. "I've heard things," he said. "Stories from frontier colonies where humans settled first." Thresh snorted. "Stories?" The trader shrugged. "Maybe. But stories usually start somewhere." He leaned forward slightly, his 6 eyes reflecting the bar lights. There was a human cargo freighter boarded by pirates near the outer reach. 12 humans on the crew. 40 raiders. Someone laughed nervously. "Let me guess," another patron said. "The pirates won." The Verlik smiled slowly. "No. The humans did." The room quieted. "They had no combat armor," the trader continued. No military training. Just tools and cargo equipment. But they turned the ship into a trap. Cut power sections, vented atmosphere where the pirates weren't expecting it, used gravity shifts to break formations. He took a sip of his drink. When authorities arrived 2 days later, every pirate was dead. Thresh frowned. That's impossible. Is it? The trader asked calmly. Another patron leaned in. I heard something similar, said a Kelith prospector sitting near the wall. Human colony on the edge of the Orion Fringe. A warlord tried to extort them. Demanded tribute. And? They told him no. A few people chuckled. And then, someone asked. He attacked. And? He lost. This time nobody laughed. The colonists were farmers, the Kelith continued. Engineers. Mechanics. No soldiers. But they turned their mining equipment into weapons. Converted their fusion drills into defensive artillery. They coordinated like a hive mind. She tilted her head thoughtfully. The warlord's fleet lost half its ships before they even reached orbit. Thresh stared at her. That's nonsense. The old Verlick trader shook his head slowly. Maybe not. Everyone looked at him. Every species evolves predators, the trader said. Something on their homeworld that hunts them. He tapped the bar with one long finger. Something that teaches them fear. He looked around the room. You know what the difference is with humans? Nobody answered. They weren't the prey. A chill ran through the bar. The trader's voice dropped lower. They were the apex predator. Thresh shifted uncomfortably. That was thousands of years ago. Maybe. But evolution doesn't forget. The bar fell silent again. I looked down at the empty stool where Jack had been sitting. And suddenly something about the night made a lot more sense. Thresh spoke again after a moment. Velair will kill him, he said. Slowly. I wiped the counter with a rag that didn't need wiping. Maybe, I said. Then I glanced at the door again. Or maybe Captain Velair just made the worst mistake of his life. Time passed. 1 hour. Then 2. Word spread quickly through the station networks about the human who had walked into the fractured comet and flattened Garvik Thresh's crew. By the 2nd hour the bar was packed. Not with criminals looking for trouble. With curious spectators. Everyone wanted to see what happened next. Even a few of Velair's own people showed up eventually to collect Thresh and his crew. They stopped when they saw the damage. One of them looked around the room. What happened here? Thresh spat on the floor. Human. The mercenaries exchanged uneasy looks. They had clearly heard some of the same stories. More time passed. 3 hours now. The music had restarted, though quieter than before. Conversations hummed through the bar like low electrical current. Speculation. Rumors. Predictions. Then the door opened. The room froze. A single figure walked in. Jack Sullivan. Alone. Whistling. The bar erupted. Voices everywhere at once. What happened? You're alive? Where's Velair? Did you kill him? I raised all 4 hands. Quiet. The room slowly settled. Jack returned to his stool at the bar like nothing unusual had happened. Can I get another drink first? He asked. You're buying? I said automatically. Fair. I poured him another Turellian amber. He took a slow sip. Then he smiled. Well, Jack said. That was an interesting conversation.